All right, so you want to create an audio overview with Notebook LM about Airbnb business plans that even an eighth grader would find interesting. That's awesome. But before before you start plugging things into Notebook LM, maybe we should take a deep dive into the source material and really try to understand it, inside and out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, getting a good grasp on the subject is essential for creating a compelling overview. And, it's interesting, even if you never plan to rent out a room or a house yourself, understanding these business plans gives you kind of a mini MBA in how businesses work. It's like a crash course.
Okay, I like that. I'm all ears. Let's break it down. We've got this sample business plan template to dissect some tips from a YouTube expert and even a real-life property in Cooperstown to analyze.
Exactly. And we'll use all of that to figure out how to explain this in a way that's simple and professional. Totally gets the point across to someone who's, let's say, not quite ready for Shark Tank just yet.
Okay, perfect. So first up, this business plan template. It's got all these different sections like the executive summary, market analysis, financial projections. It's kind of a lot.
Yeah, it can seem a little daunting at first, but think of it like this. Each section is like a piece of a puzzle, and you're putting it together to show investors that you've thought through all the different angles of your Airbnb venture.
Gotcha. So you're proving you've done your homework.
Precisely. For example, the executive summary, it's like your elevator pitch. You've got a very limited amount of time to capture someone's attention and make them excited about your Airbnb idea.
So it's got to be short, sweet, and super convincing.
Yeah.
What about the financial projections, though? I bet that's what really makes investors sit up and take notice.
Oh, absolutely. Numbers matter because they tell the story of whether your Airbnb can actually make money. Investors want to see a clear path to profitability, meaning you're making more money than you're spending.
And, the template even emphasizes that you don't have to become a millionaire overnight. It even says, quote, nobody expects them, especially if you only have one or a few properties to be a huge cash cow.
Yeah, that's a really important point and something you could definitely mention in your audio overview. It's all about managing expectations. Airbnb can be a great way to earn some extra income and build equity in a property, but it's not a get-rich-quick scheme.
Right. Slow and steady wins the race. But let's be honest, investors also want to see that you're bringing something special to the table. It's going to make you stand out from the crowd.
You hit the nail on the head. And you know what our YouTube expert actually highlighted? 5 key things that can really make or break an Airbnb business plan.
Ooh, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Lay it on me.
Okay, so first you need to demonstrate market opportunity. Is there actually demand for Airbnbs in your area? Are people searching for places to stay? Is there a need for what you're offering?
Right. So it's like figuring out if people actually want what you're selling.
Yeah.
But how do you even find that out?
Well, there's some pretty clever tricks you can use. One of them is actually Google AdWords. You can use it to see how many people are searching for Airbnb keywords in your area. It's like peeking into the minds of potential guests.
Wow, that's super smart. Okay, what's the next key thing?
Having a strong marketing and sales strategy. It's not enough to just list your property and hope for the best. You really need a solid plan to get the word out and attract those guests.
Right. It's like that saying, build it and they will come, doesn't really apply to the Airbnb world. You got to be proactive.
Exactly. Think about things like social media, eye-catching photos, maybe partnering with local businesses. It's all about making your Airbnb stand out from the crowd.
And remember that concept attraction our YouTube expert mentioned is basically about showing that you're already building buzz and excitement even before you officially launch.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Have you started a social media account for your Airbnb? Are you getting any followers or inquiries? This kind of early interest can really impress investors because it shows that there's already a demand for what you're offering.
It's like getting pre-orders for a new video game before it even comes out. Okay, cool. So we've got market opportunity, marketing strategy. What's next?
Realistic financial projections.
All right, let's crunch some numbers. But remember, we're trying to keep it eighth grade friendly.
Absolutely. So the key here is to show that you understand how much money you're likely to make, and more importantly, how much you'll get to keep after paying all those bills like cleaning fees, utilities, maybe even property management fees.
Right. It's like when you get allowance money,
Right.
you know how much you get, but you also have to think about how much you spend on snacks and other things.
That's a great analogy. You need to prove to investors that you've thought through all those costs and that your Airbnb has a good chance of being profitable. It's all about those numbers.
And our YouTube expert even mentioned that he Googled how profitable are Airbnbs and found that you can expect something like 4 to 8% profit, depending on the location.
Yeah, and benchmarking your projections against industry averages like that is always a good idea. It shows that you've done your research and that your numbers are grounded in reality.
Okay, so two more key highlights to go. What's next?
Highlighting any relevant industry experience that you might have. Do you have any background in hospitality, property management, or even just home renovation?
Oh, so it's not just about having a nice place to rent, but also showing that you know how to run the whole show.
Exactly. If you have experience with guest communication handling bookings or even fixing things around the house, that can really boost your credibility with investors.
Right. It's like applying for a job at a pizza place. If you've already worked in a restaurant, you've got a leg up.
Exactly. It shows that you have the skills and the knowledge to handle the job. All right, last but not least, the final key highlight is having skin in the game.
Skin in the game.
Yeah, basically it means you're investing your own money into the Airbnb.
So you're not just relying on someone else's cash. You're showing that you're serious and committed.
Exactly. Investors are much more likely to support you if they see you're willing to share both the risk and the rewards. It proves that you really believe in your Airbnb and that you're in it to win it.
This is great stuff. We've covered the basics of Airbnb business plans, and I'm already feeling much more confident about creating that audio overview for Notebook LM. But how do we apply all of this to a real-life property?
Well, that's where our Cooperstown case study comes in. We're going to take a look at a property called Gilbertsville Farmhouse and see if it has what it takes to be a successful Airbnb, even though right now it's marketed as a wedding venue.
Oh, that's interesting. It's like we're flipping the script and looking at things from a different angle.
Exactly. And as we go through each element of that Airbnb business plan, we're going to ask ourselves, how would this apply to Gilbertsville Farmhouse? It'll help you understand how to analyze any potential Airbnb, even if it's not your own.
All right, I'm ready. Let's dive into the Cooperstown case study.
So we've talked about the big picture stuff about these Airbnb business plans, but let's zoom in on something super important. The financial side of things.
Ooh, okay, let's talk money. I'm ready to channel my inner accountant. But keep in mind, we're trying to explain this to eighth graders, so no complicated Wall Street jargon.
Okay.
Gotcha. So think of it this way. Financial projections, they're basically like a budget for your Airbnb. It's all about figuring out how much money you can realistically make, and even more importantly, how much you get to keep after paying all the bills.
Okay, that makes sense. It's kind of like when you get allowance money, you might get $10, but if you spend $5 on candy, you only have $5 left over.
Yeah, exactly. It's about understanding that difference between revenue, which is all the money you bring in, and profit, which is what's left after covering all those expenses.
Okay, cool. So how do you actually predict how much money you'll make with an Airbnb? Where do you even start? Well, remember how we talked about using Google AdWords to see how many people are searching for Airbnbs in a specific area? That's a really good starting point for market research.
Right. So you're basically seeing how popular Airbnbs are in a certain area, but how do you translate that into actual dollar amounts?
Oh, there's a really cool tool called AirDNA that can be super helpful for this. It gives you data on average rental rates for Airbnbs in specific locations.
So you can see how much other people are charging for similar properties. That's super helpful.
It is. It can help you set competitive prices for your Airbnb and make much more accurate predictions about how much you could potentially earn.
Okay, so AirDNA gives you a ballpark figure, but you also have to factor in all the expenses, right? All those hidden costs.
Absolutely. So many things to think about. You get your cleaning fees, utilities like electricity and water, maybe even property management fees if you're not handling that yourself. All of those costs eat into your profit.
Right? It's like going to the amusement park. You might have $20 to spend, but after buying tickets and food and souvenirs, you probably don't have much left over.
Exactly. Creating realistic financial projections is all about understanding those costs and making sure your Airbnb can actually turn a profit.
So you're basically proving to investors that you're not just dreaming big, you're actually thinking smart about the money side of things.
You got it. And speaking of smart thinking, there are these things called key financial ratios that can really help you assess the health of your Airbnb business.
Key financial ratios. That sounds a little intimidating. Can we break that down a bit?
Of course. I know they might sound a little fancy, but they're just ways to measure how well your Airbnb is performing. It's kind of like checking your grades in school to see how you're doing in different subjects.
Okay, so it's like a report card for your Airbnb. What are some of the subjects you'd be looking at?
Well, one important ratio is occupancy rate. It tells you what percentage of the time your Airbnb is actually booked.
So if your Airbnb is booked for 20 days out of a 30-day month, your occupancy rate would be about 67%. And like the higher, the better.
Right. Exactly. A high occupancy rate means you're making the most of your property and maximizing your earnings.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about like the price you charge for each night? How does that fit into the whole financial picture?
Yeah, that's called your average daily rate, or ADR for short. It's basically the average amount you make per night when your Airbnb is booked. So the higher your ADR, the more revenue you generate.
Okay, so if my Airbnb costs $100 per night and it's booked for 20 nights, my revenue would be $2,000.
You got it. And then you'd subtract all your expenses from that revenue to figure out your profit.
So it's like figuring out how much money you actually get to keep after running a lemonade stand. You might sell a lot of lemonade, but you still have to pay for the lemons and the sugar and the cups.
Perfect analogy. And there's one more important ratio I want to mention, RevPAR, which stands for revenue per available room.
RevPAR. It kind of sounds like a Star Wars character.
Haha, it's not as complicated as it sounds. Basically, it tells you how much money you're making from each room, even when it's not always booked.
So it's like figuring out the average amount of money you make per lemonade cup, even if you don't sell every single cup you make.
Exactly. It helps you see that big picture and make sure you're really using your Airbnb space effectively.
Right. I think I'm getting the hang of these financial ratios.
Mhm.
So now how does all this apply to our Cooperstown case study? How would these concepts work for Gilbertsville Farmhouse?
That's a great question. So remember, Gilbertsville Farmhouse is currently being used as a wedding venue. So their financial picture is probably pretty different from a typical Airbnb.
Right. They're probably making a lot of money from each wedding, but it might not have bookings every single weekend.
Exactly. Their occupancy rate might be lower than a traditional Airbnb, but their average daily rate is probably much higher because they're offering a whole package, the venue, the catering, the accommodations.
But if they wanted to open up Gilbertsville Farmhouse to like individual Airbnb guests, they'd have to think about these ratios differently, right?
Absolutely. They'd need to research the average daily rates for Airbnbs in the Cooperstown area and adjust their pricing accordingly. They'd also have to factor in the added costs of managing all those individual bookings like cleaning fees and all that guest communication.
So it's a whole different ballgame when you're dealing with individual bookings versus big events like weddings.
It is. And that's why understanding these financial concepts is so important. It helps you make informed decisions about how to run your Airbnb business, whether you're renting out a single room or a sprawling farmhouse.
Okay, I'm starting to feel like a financial whiz. But before we get too carried away with the numbers, let's talk about something equally important, the guest experience. After all, happy guests mean good reviews, and good reviews mean more bookings, right?
You're absolutely right. Creating a positive and memorable experience for your guests is essential for success in the Airbnb world. So let's delve into that next.
So we talked about the business side of things, crunching those numbers and all, but let's get real. What's the secret sauce that makes an Airbnb really stand out from the crowd? What makes it special?
That's where the guest experience comes in. Think of it like this. You're not just providing a place to sleep. You're crafting an experience, a memory, something that'll stick with your guests.
Yeah, okay, I get that. It's like the difference between staying at some boring old hotel and finding like a hidden gem, that place that makes you feel like you're actually living like a local.
Exactly. Airbnb guests are often looking for that personal touch, that authentic connection. They want to feel like they're part of something, something special, something unique.
Okay, so how do you create that wow factor? Where do you even begin?
Well, it all starts with the basics, honestly. Your property needs to be clean, comfortable, well-maintained. Nobody wants to walk into a dusty, cluttered mess after a long journey.
Right, first impressions are everything. Like when you invite friends over, you want your place to be tidy and inviting, presentable.
Absolutely. And those little touches, they can really go a long way. Fresh flowers, a welcome basket with local goodies, maybe even a handwritten note.
It's like saying, hey, we're so glad you're here. We put some extra effort into making you feel at home.
Exactly. It's about going beyond the bare minimum and really making your guests feel like, they're more than just a transaction.
And remember those unique features we talked about at Gilbertsville Farmhouse? The multiple barns, the private beach, the glamping tents.
Yeah, those are perfect examples. Those are the things that make a property stand out. Those are the things that give guests, a story to tell when they go back home.
Yeah, it's like choosing that Airbnb with a treehouse instead of just a regular apartment, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's those like quirky extras that really seal the deal.
You got it. It's all about showcasing what makes your Airbnb unique, that little something extra that guests can't find anywhere else.
So, okay, we've got the place looking good and feeling welcoming. What's the next step in creating that awesome guest experience?
Communication is key. From the moment a guest books your Airbnb to the moment they check out, clear and responsive communication is absolutely essential.
So it's not enough to just have a nice place. You actually have to be a good host. Answering questions quickly, providing helpful information, all that stuff.
Exactly. Think of it like being a concierge. You're there to help your guests navigate your property, the neighborhood, even the city itself.
So you're like providing local recommendations, insider tips that only locals would know.
Precisely. You want to be that friendly guide who helps your guests, really make the most of their stay. And remember how we talked about seasonality in Cooperstown? Like, if you're hosting during those busy baseball tournaments, clear communication is even more crucial.
Right, because you want to make sure your guests know what to expect, especially when demand is high and things can get a little hectic.
For sure. Be upfront about things like check-in procedures, house rules, any potential challenges they might encounter, like limited parking or noise levels.
Right, transparency is key. Better to be upfront about those things than to have guests arrive with unrealistic expectations.
Couldn't agree more. It's all about honesty and building trust with your guests.
Okay, so we've covered the physical space communication. What else can hosts do to really elevate that guest experience, make it top-notch?
Safety and security, super important. Guests need to feel comfortable and at ease in your Airbnb.
So making sure the property is well-lit, secure, has all the necessary safety features, like smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors.
Exactly. It's also important to provide clear instructions on how to use those security features, like alarm systems or door locks.
Right. And of course, respecting guest privacy is huge. Nobody wants to feel like they're being watched or like someone's hovering over them.
Absolutely. Give your guests their space while still being available if they need anything. It's a delicate balance, being helpful but also respecting boundaries.
And don't forget about those little extras, those thoughtful amenities that can really make a difference.
Right. You're talking about those things that go above and beyond the essentials. High-speed Wi-Fi streaming services, board games, maybe even bicycles for guests to use.
Or for a place like Gilbert's Hill Farmhouse, maybe they could offer kayak rentals for that private beach or s'mores kits for a bonfire, things like that.
Exactly. It's all about finding creative ways to enhance the guest experience and really make their stay even more memorable.
All right, last but certainly not least, let's talk about reviews. Those are kind of a big deal in the Airbnb world, right?
Huge. Reviews are like social proof. They give potential guests a glimpse into what it's actually like to stay at your Airbnb.
So it's like getting recommendations from a friend who's already stayed there.
That's a great way to put it. And positive reviews can make a massive difference in attracting new bookings. Always encourage your guests to leave honest feedback and be sure to respond to their reviews, both positive and negative, in a professional and courteous manner.
It shows that you actually care about their experience and that you're committed to, providing the best possible stay.
Exactly. Reviews are an opportunity to build your reputation as a host and to continuously improve your Airbnb offerings.
Okay, so we've covered so much today, from the nitty-gritty of those business plans to the importance of crafting a stellar guest experience. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners who are about to create that audio overview with Notebook LM?
Keep it simple and engaging. Remember, 8th graders are smart, but they don't need a lecture on financial projections. Focus on the big picture. What makes an Airbnb business successful? How can you create an experience that guests will rave about?
And don't forget to have fun with it. Airbnb is all about creativity and hospitality. Let your personality shine through and, encourage your listeners to think outside the box.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Airbnb business plans. We hope you learned something new and that you're feeling inspired to create those amazing experiences for your future guests.
And until next time, happy hosting.